Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
And a happy Thursday morning to you. Thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, afterwards, wherever you podcast. We appreciate that. Yesterday, we were all scrambling to our legal advisors when the news broke that Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee had struck down 6 indictments against Donald Trump and co-conspirators. Tierney Sneed at CNN reporting that the presiding judge in the Georgia criminal case against Donald Trump and his allies has thrown out some of the charges against the former president and several of his co-defendants. The partial dismissal by Georgia Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee leaves most of the sprawling racketeering indictment intact. McAfee ruled that 6 charges in the 41-count indictment related to Trump and some co-defendants allegedly soliciting the violation of oath by a public officer lack the required detail about what underlying crime the defendants were soliciting. Trump was named in 3 of the counts specifically, meaning the former president is now facing 88 charges over the 4 criminal indictments in Georgia, New York, Washington, D.C., and Florida. Prosecutors allege that Trump and some of his co-defendants violated the law by pressuring members of the Georgia legislature to unlawfully appoint presidential electors. They also brought the charge against Trump and his ex-White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, for the January 2021 phone call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, in which Trump asked Raffensperger to find the votes that would win him the state. So this is a lot of legalese, and admittedly, in my 9 seasons of watching Suits, I don't fully have the grasp of what's going on here. What I do gather is I get a sense that this is somehow a bit of a screw-up from the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, or that the case wasn't really strong enough, or I don't know. Elie Honig is the CNN legal analyst. He chimes in on this.
Well, Jim, this is an undeniable setback for the district attorney. Not the entire indictment, but 6 of the 40 counts have now been dismissed. And here's why. It's important to understand. Georgia state law has this sort of unusual law that says it's a crime to solicit, to ask a public official to violate his official oath of office. And as Nick just laid out, there are 6 counts in this indictment that say Donald Trump and other defendants asked various members of the Georgia Senate and the Georgia legislature and the Georgia Secretary of State, other public officials, to violate their oaths to the Constitution by essentially swinging the election. But what the judge says here is, you prosecutors, you have to say what part of the Constitution. The judge says there are hundreds of provisions in the U.S. Constitution and in the Georgia state Constitution. And the purpose of an indictment is to give defendants notice so they know what they're defending against. And you can't just say, well, you tried to violate the Constitution. The judge says what you have to say is what specific provisions of the Constitution, what specific sections of the Constitution. That's not in the indictment. Therefore, the judge says those charges are legally unfounded and now they're dismissed.
And so, Ellie, I mean, for the folks at home, Nick Valencia brought up the part of this where Trump pressured the Georgia Secretary of State to sort of throw out that election victory for Joe Biden in the state of Georgia. Does that get lifted out of the case? Is that still a part of this case? What does that mean?
It is still part of the case, that particular act, that phone call between Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger, where Trump asks him to just find 11,780 votes. We've all heard it many times. That is still part of the case. That phone call is still part of the case. There are other charges in the case that squarely relate to that phone call. For example, the first count in the indictment, which is the very broad racketeering count, will still include that conduct. There are other fraud counts that would still include that conduct. So I don't think this ruling changes the type of evidence that the DA is going to be able to introduce, but it does knock out some of the charges. And look, it's embarrassing for prosecutors. It's a screw up by prosecutors when you bring a charge and then a judge throws it out before it even goes to trial.
Yeah, that's not good. But I'm not a smart man when it comes to matters of Georgia constitutionality or sometimes even law in general. I know, hard to believe, right? Again, I watched all 9 seasons of Suits. What the hell? I should know better. I do defer to professors and other legal analysts. The professor and political scientist at Georgia State University, by the way. Great follow on the Twitter X platform Anthony M. Kreis. Anthony Michael Kreis. That's Kreis, by the way. Go ahead and add to his growing legion of fans. He's a fun follow. He's also a handsome dude, but he's got a boyfriend. Anyway, he, about, I want to say 8 o'clock this morning, starts tweeting us some school lessons in case you want to belly up to the to the law school bar here. Good morning. Let's talk about the Georgia Constitution. Yesterday, Judge McAfee granted quashal on a number of charges related to Donald Trump and his allies' alleged attempts, referring to inducing state officials to violate their oaths of office. So what does the Georgia Constitution require? Christ tweets. And then he gets into a good old thread here. The special demurrers centered on the fact the Fulton County DA did not articulate how the election interference defendants, if successful, would have suborned a constitutional violation. The Georgia Constitution is unique, and it is very important here for Willis if she wants to indict. And by the way, off the record, I believe, well, you know what? I'll let him explain in a prior tweet yesterday what I think she can do to just fix this and get back on track. But this is still going to cause, guess what, y'all? Delays, more delays, which of course plays right into the Trump legal team's hands. Christ continues, most importantly, Georgians have an express right to vote. The right to vote, at its core, means the right to cast a ballot and have it count. Trump asked Secretary of State Raffensperger to dilute votes in the famous phone call, a fraud that would unlawfully void voters' preferred outcome. This is also key for Mark Meadows, whose second charge was tied to this event, as well as entreaties made to state legislators to expunge Georgia voters' inviolable right to enjoy free and fair elections. This right is much more plain in the state constitution than federal, Christ tweets. Not only is the right to vote at issue, but an easy case can be made that the defendants' efforts would have denied millions of Georgians the equal protection of the law, and a strong case the acts, if carried out, would have been forms of impermissible viewpoint discrimination. Finally, Georgia's Constitution deems legislative acts that violate the federal Constitution void, thus incorporating federal principles into legislative decision-making. This is not an especially strong argument compared to the rest, but it's icing on the theoretical cake, Christ tweets. One other interesting provision he adds is the General Assembly has an affirmative obligation to protect Georgians' rights. This is exceptionally vague, but it is also there, as I highlighted with a green arrow in the tweet he did. For some more insights, we turn to Randall Eliason. He is a columnist for the New York Times, Washington Post, also a white-collar criminal professor at George Washington Law, a former federal prosecutor. I speak for a living as well. He tweets, as a general prosecutor rule, if you thought the charge was important enough to bring in the first place and the problem can be fixed relatively easily, there's usually little reason you wouldn't fix that. He tweets that while retweeting our good friend, Professor Kreis, who tweeted earlier yesterday, there are many reasons some prosecutors wouldn't go back to a grand jury, and I see some who think the DA won't, but the dismissed charges today speak to the heart of the case, protecting the constitutional order that might affect the calculus, but also, have y'all met Vonnie Willis? Yeah. Now, later in the day, Professor Kreis joined Lawfare's Benjamin Witz and Lawfare's legal fellow and courts correspondent Anna Bauer. By the way, Anna dressing better than the other two for this live YouTube feed that they did yesterday to discuss what exactly a demurrer is, the differentiation between that and just an outright dismissal, and what happens from here. And Christ chimes in first.
I'll let Anna take that one.
Okay.
Well, okay. So Judge McAfee actually takes some pains at the beginning of this order to explain to folks who might be unfamiliar with the weirdness of Georgia's challenges to the indictment, because there are several different types. But I think, Ben, the way that people can think about it is that a special demurrer, which is what that was the form of this challenge to the charges, is kind of a request for a more, I think that as Judge McAfee wrote in his order, it's a request for an indictment that is more perfect in form, and it is a request for a more definite kind of statement or explanation of the charges. So it's all about how the indictment was written. It's very technical in that respect. It's not that Judge McAfee is saying, the conduct of these defendants don't amount to conduct sufficient to amount to a criminal charge. What he's saying is that the state didn't really draft this indictment in the way they should have. And in other jurisdictions, folks might be familiar with something called a bill of particulars. So let's say that there is an indictment and a judge finds that for whatever reason, it's not specific enough to give the defendants notice of what the charges are against them, what the theory of the case is, because that's the whole point of having an indictment that is, what they say is perfect and form as well as substance, is that you want to give the defendants notice and have their due process rights protected so that they know exactly what it is that's charged against them and have some sense or advanced sense of what the state's case is. So in other jurisdictions, if the state hasn't really drafted the indictment in the way that a judge thinks that they should have, then they can just supplement the indictment with something called a bill of particulars that kind of explains more fully what the particular details of the charges are. But in Georgia, we do not have the system for requesting a bill of particulars. And so when there is a challenge under a special demurrer, if the judge decides that those counts ought to be dismissed because the state didn't, articulate what it should have or sufficiently articulate the elements of the crime of the indictment, then that means that the judge can quash those counts. We'll talk a little bit later about, what the state can then do in response, but hopefully that kind of explains what a special demurrer is.
So after the three of them discussed for a few minutes how hard it is to pronounce the word demurrer or how to pronounce demurrer, seriously, they went on for this for a couple of minutes. Benjamin Witz just asked Anthony Michael Kreis, so how big of a deal is this, or is it a big deal at all?
I think it could be. I'm kind of in the position where it's like, yes, it's a big deal, but it's more of a big deal depending on what the DA does, right? So, ultimately, the DA gets another bite at the apple, and can go back to the grand jury and with greater specificity spell out exactly what it is she says that was done unlawful and kind of give with some kind of granularity and specificity details about what the theory of criminality is, and we can talk more about what the actual issue is later. But if she doesn't go back, on the one hand, I guess that's a handful fewer headaches for some of these defendants, but they still face racketeering charges and all the other big charges that they had already. So those aren't disturbed. I don't know. I think what it is, essentially, it's going to be the DA is going to step back and probably go back to the grand jury and attempt to get this kind of more perfected indictment to bring these charges again. And I think at the end of the day, then we'll have a kind of another debate whether those are valid, and I'm sure there'll be appeals later about that. But I don't know. I don't think that ultimately these counts are going to go away. I think they're just going to come back, and we'll be having another discussion about whether these superseding indictments are going to be a big deal or not. And so but if the DA doesn't decide to go back to the grand jury and decides to kind of give up on it, yes, that's a win for these defendants, but at the same time, that might also be strategic in the sense that it speeds things up.
Narrows the case.
Makes the case more narrow. So, I don't want to call it a wash. I just don't think it's, it's not just kind of like this monumental, epic change in the dynamics. I just don't see it that way. I see it as just kind of something that is temporarily kind of dislodging whatever the momentum was. I mean, but again, right? We also have the disqualification issue, which I know we've discussed before too. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and I think it's easy to overstate it. I think it's probably easy to understate it. We'll just have to see.
You're listening to The Ron Show. Back after this. By the way, you can follow The Ron Show on your preferred... By the way, I'm picking up Thread followers. I guess I should do stuff on Threads now. At Ron Show ATL on Threads, on Instagram, on the Twitter X platform, Facebook as well. You can follow The Ron Show there and keep up with the headlines and each day's podcast update. I do a blog with show notes. In fact, I mentioned I do show notes all the time, and there will be show notes today as well. In fact, there's going to be a lot of show notes. If you are attending a college or university, maybe you're in law school, today will be a great day to cite The Ron Show for show notes because there are going to be quite a few. So as I've mentioned this before, doing this show is not my full-time job, which is why it's sometimes shoddy and sometimes thrown together at the last minute. It just is. My day starts getting up, doing a little research, some notes, and then heading to the studio to put this show together. And then I got to go do real estate. I got to show houses and hopefully get houses listed and sold or offers made on houses and bought. And so that's my day. I'm also coaching a softball team this spring. So there's a lot of cat herding there. So I did spend a little bit more time yesterday after doing the show because the news broke that Scott McAfee demurred those 6 indictments. I know how to say the word. And had to quickly go like, all right, what does this mean? And listening to so many experts from various sources. And yes, I think Professor Christ is dashing fellow. He also has a boyfriend. And I just, he tweets things in a way that he understands that so many of his followers are not law students. They're not law professors. They're not lawyers. They're not legal experts. They're us. They're our average Joes and Janes. And he spells things out in ways that we understand. So reading through some of his notes on the Twitter X platform yesterday and some other folks who have chimed in, some folks that he'd retweeted, and also, again, the Lawfare blog. If you don't follow Lawfare blog, they're a good follow as well on YouTube. I get the sense that what has happened here is, whether on purpose or not, the Fulton District Attorney's Office filed some indictments that really lacked specificity. It's like when you get pulled over by a police officer and he says, here, you've been charged with a crime, your court date is this date, and I'll see you there. And you're like, wait, what did I do? Was it the rolling stop sign? Was it the red light I ran? Was I driving too fast and you caught me doing so? Which is it? And the officer doesn't tell you. Well, you show up for court having no idea specifically what crime it is you've committed. Well, actually, in this case, they do know the crime. They just don't know the legal statute that they violated. I mean, I think they know, but they really want the district attorney's office. Well, I say they. Scott McAfee, the Superior Court judge, wants the specific constitutional statute on the indictments that spell out specifically what it is. And I think he knows too. I don't know. This is kind of one of those like, dot your I's, cross your T's kind of thing. Get it all in writing. Make sure that, this is a foolproof indictment. And I mean, come on. It sort of is, right? I mean, I'm not on the judge. I'm not on the jury, and I'm not the judge. But come on, it kind of is. We've all heard the famous phone call. We all know the antics. We all know the electors, the fake electors situation. I think this just feels to me a little bit like either, again, and I can't decide, was this done on purpose, vaguely filed on purpose? And the reason I say that is because as a defendant, you go into a courtroom not knowing what statute it is that you have to explain your way around or out of violating. It makes it harder for you to defend yourself. And Scott McAfee, for all that we've learned over the last few months, I mean, he's like Georgia's Lance Ito, right? By the way, he's up for election. He too has to show that the work he does is fair and impartial. I guess. I mean, he's running in Fulton County. So Yeah, I get the sense that this is just one of those deals where he's wanting to make this all look as fair and impartial as possible. And again, whether on purpose or sloppy work, and I really hate to think that that's what it is, but maybe. The Fulton District Attorney's Office filed these indictments without drilling in on the specificities that the defendants need to explain their way out of or around in defending themselves. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. It kind of makes sense to me. I don't really get the sense that this is like a big win for Donald Trump or his co-defendants, Rudy Giuliani, et cetera, and so on. But I do get the sense that this is yet another delay. If, or maybe not, maybe this speeds up the trial. If the Fulton District Attorney's Office decides, whatever, we're going to go on with the rest and not dwell on those too much. Or if they say, you know what, all right, here, we're just going to rewrite this stuff and file it again, go back to the grand jury and get this done. A minor delay, few weeks, month, 2 months maybe, and then get right back at it. And as of yet, we've heard nothing from the Fulton District Attorney's Office that tells us which direction they are leaning. All right, good news, Metro Atlanta. We're number 6. I'll cover that next.
Want to be on the show? Have a cause or campaign you'd like to speak up for? Email Ron at ronshowatl.com or call 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So it was 1 month ago that WANF-TV Atlanta News First had this little nugget.
So it might feel like it in traffic every day, but it turns out Atlanta is not full.
In fact, we're learning Metro Atlanta is now projected to grow by nearly 2 million people in the next 25 years.
God.
The Atlanta Regional Commission says the Metro could reach 7.9 million people by the year 2050. By then, Atlanta could pass Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. to become the 6th largest metropolitan area in the country. To accommodate the growth, the commission approved a $168 billion transportation plan. It calls for investments to improve roads and create new bike and pedestrian options.
Yes, because bike and pedestrian options are definitely going to alleviate traffic on the downtown connector, which, by the way, we're going to be putting a cover over, which will make that trip even more arduous and unexciting, not fun for those stuck in traffic. I can't tell you how often I'm driving folks around to show houses and we are stuck in traffic just staring at brake lights, and we have this realization, or I have this realization, my God, we have more people moving here. We're going to become, the 6th largest metro, again, by 2050, and where the hell are they going to drive? Because while we cannot say that Atlanta full, I know a lot of people like to, Atlanta, we full. We're not. There's plenty of room. We are, of course, the city in the forest. And I hate to think that we lose some of the forest canopy, but there is room, and there's a lot of vacant land and blighted property. There's ways to do this that it makes sense, and it cleans up the city and the metro area, and we all get along cohesively. But okay, while WANF-TV last month was saying that by 2050 we could surpass Philadelphia and Washington D.C., the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Jennifer Peebles and Charles Minshew says by 2050, how about by 2025? The Atlanta metropolitan area has leapfrogged both Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia to become the nation's 6th largest metropolitan region, according to newly released population estimates from the U.S. Census Bureau. The population in Atlanta's 29-county region increased a little more than 1% to 6.3 million between 2022 and 2023, gaining nearly 69,000 residents. D.C. and Philly also grew, but not as fast as Atlanta. Y'all, what are we doing? What are we doing here? People are still coming, and look, great. As a residential realtor, I'm all for this. And by the way, if you listen here on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, maybe wherever you podcast, maybe you listen on the on-demand tab at ProgressiveVoices.com. See how I slid in the pitch, kids? I am a residential realtor, so if you're going to be relocating to Atlanta, by all means, hit me up at Ron Show ATL on your social media platforms. I just gave you at the lead to the segment here, 404-919-2725. You can, by all means, hit me up. I'm glad to help you find a place to live here in Metro Atlanta. And we can talk about avoiding traffic, but it's going to be mostly talk. Unless you work from home, you don't need to travel very far. You just don't need to get around, within maybe a mile or two to get your groceries and retail options and food options. That's fine. We can find that too. There's plenty of nice little enclaves. But if you need to commute, if you need to, for example, work downtown or midtown, but you don't want to spend a ton of money, so we're going to have to find you a place maybe up in Sandy Springs near the North Springs station. Maybe you can enjoy traveling by MARTA into your job. I'm trying to think where else you could pull this off. Decatur? Decatur is kind of relatively affordable, maybe, sort of. Tucker, you can, drive into the Chamblee station, maybe, sort of. It's not easy, though. If you want to avoid the long commute in Metro Atlanta, it's not easy. And I have to think, and this is the residential realtor insights here, I have to think that you're going to start seeing some of those MARTA nodes become way more popular for residential real estate development. And I'm not just thinking like, detached housing. I'm thinking clustered housing, condominiums, townhomes, et cetera, and so on, maximizing the use of land to, and MARTA, for its part, has actually been working on redeveloping its stations and land around its stations for that very purpose, for that very reason. Because I think they see like what I see, as we expect to go from, what did the article say now? We're at 6.3 million people in Metro Atlanta, and they're expecting another 1.7 in the next 25 years. Where are we going to put them? MARTA is in no condition, fiscally or otherwise, to be prepared for that. They're not. There's no hard rail transit blueprints. There's nothing that says, well, we're planning to, and we can't, we can't get referendums passed in Gwinnett County because the rural voters of Gwinnett County, who see no benefit to MARTA, don't want to chip in to pay for MARTA. Although I think at some point in time, that growth is going to show up at their doorstep too, and then they're going to wonder, well, why didn't we vote for MARTA? Mm-hmm. Cobb County hasn't had a referendum in a long time, although I think the political will is there. We talked with the new mayor of, the mayor of the new city of Mableton, Georgia, last week, I think, and he's a big fan of MARTA, but MARTA doesn't go to Mableton. It goes close, but it doesn't go to Mableton. And we don't have much MARTA rail. In fact, we have none past the airport going south into Clayton County, and y'all, 75 and 85 coming into Fulton County from the south end, from Clayton County, is a beating. Oh my God, it sucks. So what are we doing? What are we doing? The Atlanta Planning Commission says, hey, bike trails, pedestrian paths. And meanwhile, we have folks who are fighting light rail here in the city of Atlanta along our Beltline, which, by the way, would help alleviate some of the traffic issues that we face on our city streets and maybe even the interstate. I mean, I'm trying to think if there's a reason for me to go, say, to Buckhead. Yeah, I need to get on the interstate. Where I live in Old Fourth Ward, I got to get on at Freedom Parkway and slowly weave my way into the crush of traffic, and it's always slow moving through downtown Atlanta. Always. Unless it's like super late at night, it's always a sludge of traffic making its way up. So I have to get on the interstate here at Freedom Parkway, and I've said for a long time now, there are too many exits on the downtown connector. Too many. And I think that causes a lot of the problems. You've got the exit at Freedom, you've got the exit at Pine Street, and then you've got the one Peachtree, and then you've got the 10th, and you got the 14th, and you got the 17th, all there. North Avenue, forgot about North Avenue, all there within like a little 3/4 of a mile cluster. That Cortland, I forgot about Cortland. You throw in Cortland, MLK. You've got all of these exits just crushed right into this one spot, and I think that causes a lot of problems too. But I guess the pushback to that is, well, if you say you eliminated half those exits, it's just going to create a bottleneck on the exit ramps. Or we could, I don't know, have mass transit. Light rail, for example, I'm talking about me going to Buckhead. I could, instead of driving, knowing that I'm going to Buckhead, take the light rail that's supposed to snake alongside the Beltline and get there using that. Oh, but to dream. And let me just say this. Here's some of the more concerning things to point out. The two fastest growing counties in metropolitan Atlanta, Dawson County. Y'all know where that is? Dawsonville. You go 400 like you're going to the mountains. I drive through it quite frequently when I'm going to a hike or going to Cleveland or Helen or up into North Carolina or Tennessee sometimes. Dawson County. By the way, Dawsonville is a boom town. It is sprawl, just sprawl. Lots of strip malls and parking lots, and they're going to experience some things. And again, it's Georgia 400. That's their one outlet. If they are indeed needing to work here in the metro, closer into the metro, I should say, because they are Metro Atlanta now, then Georgia 400 already a bottleneck to and fro during the commute, leading into 85, which just creates a bottleneck at 485, which bleeds into 75 just north of downtown, forming the connector. Y'all, that's a problem. The other county is Jackson County, north of Athens. Those two counties, by the way, among the nation's top 10 fastest growing counties with populations greater than 20,000. The other metro Atlanta county experiencing some heightened growth would be, this is metro Atlanta, Lamar County with the town of Barnesville. They've seen growth of 4.8% in the last year, going from 18,697 residents in 2021 to now just over 20,401 residents in 2023 and growing. Do you know how to get to Barnesville? Remember me telling you what a beating I-75 south of Atlanta is? South of downtown Atlanta is? Yeah. It's basically south of Griffin, past Locust Grove and Hampton and McDonough, south of Griffin, and actually not all that far from Thomaston, Georgia. It's a ways. It's about 60-ish miles from downtown Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta, but it's a long drive because it's 75. Or you can take Highway 4119. That's fine too. It's not going to. In fact, that's just a sea of red lights, stoplights, and one of those 4-lane divided highways that just takes forever, especially once you get closer into Atlanta, because we don't have adequate mass transit for the 6th largest metropolitan area that we now are in these United States. But hey, can I just tell you this? Here's the bright side. Can I just tell you that now that Atlanta is the 6th largest metropolitan area in the country, it falls in line with 4 and 5, which as well do not have adequate mass transportation. That would be the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex with Arlington and Fort Worth, and Houston and the Woodlands, Texas. Not enough mass transit for those metropolitan areas. Chicago, of course, number 3. We all know Chicago has abundant mass transit. In fact, I talked to a lady a couple days ago who was in town for a large construction equipment convention of some sort, and they alternate their conventions between Chicago and Atlanta every other year. She lives in Los Angeles, which by the way is number 2 still, New York number 1. She lived in Los Angeles. She now lives in Dallas and travels to this convention every year. She comes to Atlanta, she comes to Chicago. In March, she said, I don't care how cold it is in Chicago in March, I prefer the convention. Are you hearing me, CVB people? Metro Chamber? I prefer when the convention's in Chicago. There's more to do, and it's way easier to get around. She was staying at the Marriott Marquis this convention at the Georgia World Congress Center. And by the way, there's no light rail connecting the hotels in the hotel district to the Georgia World Congress Center or Mercedes-Benz Stadium if there's a convention or show or sporting event there, or State Farm Arena if there's a show, a convention, a sporting event there. They're left to hotel shuttles, which just adds to the congestion, Uber or Lyft ride shares, which just adds to the congestion. Or if the weather is nice, and hey, sometimes in March, my gosh, it's going to be beautiful today, like 80 degrees, then yes, you have the option of walking a handful of blocks and trying to not get hit by those shuttles or rideshare drivers who are taking other folks to the very same thing you're going to. But there's no trolley, there's no light rail, because for some reason, Metro Atlanta leaders, and listen, I'm not putting it all on them. I'm not putting it all on the city. I'm not putting it all on MARTA. Although, come on, MARTA, get it together. I feel like I'm poking that stick. Do something. But there's also the fact that MARTA is the largest mass transit authority in the country that doesn't get $1 of state funding. When I tell people this who are visiting, they're like, really? Yeah, really. And they're like, why? Well, MARTA was put together in an era where there was a lot of racial animus, a lot of anti-city sentiment, and don't think that that's gone away. It hasn't gone away. Or otherwise, by now, you would see a movement under the Gold Dome to get some state funding for MARTA. It doesn't get a dime of state funding to help, grow and solve what is now a situation that is not just Fulton and DeKalb and the city of Atlanta's problem. It is a regional issue, and we don't seem to have the political will all the times where it's needed to opt in and join the Metro Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. And I know I tend to harp on mass transit a lot when we talk about, the region's growth. Obviously, some of the outlying counties have to deal with growing their school systems and other infrastructure needs, utilities and water, et cetera, and so on, development and land use, et cetera, and so on. But in my mind, it's the transit. It's the thing that is the hidden tax for all of us who live here that we keep paying because we don't invest in alternate modes of transportation that would benefit us all, even if you never decide to use it, by lessening the load on the roads you decide you wish to stick to using because you like having your little private time in your car going to or from work. So we're heading into the home stretch, final segment here of The Ron Show, and thank you for listening, whether it's on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, wherever you podcast, on-demand tab at ProgressiveVoices.com. That's right. And by the way, we are on a weekend time slot as well. I haven't checked the time slot on that. Let me follow up on that, and I'll start promoting that a little bit more heavily. You may not be aware of this because not many folks actually follow what's happening under the Gold Dome in the General Assembly, but the school voucher bill that was tabled last year, it seems like it's destined to actually happen. More than $100 million of Georgia taxpayer dollars are going to wind up funding private school vouchers that the overwhelming majority of that money is going to go to students of parents who are already sending their kids to private school, who apparently can already afford to do so, and now they're going to get a stipend to offset that. It doesn't mean that kids in troubled schools or struggling districts are going to see an opportunity to now attend private school because the stipend's not going to cover full tuition, right? It's also not going to deal with the transportation needs. And so, what does it do to prevent the private schools from increasing their tuition to make it even more burdensome? I want to point out, and by the way, I was following Stephen Owens on the Twitter X platform because he's been in these committee hearings at the Georgia House for days now. He is the Director of Education at Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. You can follow him at Stephen, that is with a PH, Stephen J. Owens _ He has been covering this bit by bit. And one thing that I really wanted to hone in on was when Representative Lydia Glaze wanted to present a friendly amendment that would require a private school to receive all kids that apply if they take public funding. And Stephen Owen says, that's a fair ask considering the state's investment, right? Listen to how this exchange went.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just have one friendly amendment that I'd love for you to consider. For private schools, can we adopt something that says that when private schools accept public funds for students to come to their school, that we can assure that all of these kids will have eligibility and be accepted into the schools?
I mean, why not?
So you're recommending that if a private school accepts any public funding for their students, that they would have to be, they would have to accept all students. I assume you're suggesting like through a lottery or something.
No, actually, what I am saying is that if a student takes the Promise Scholarship and goes to a private school in their county, close to them, their parents deem that this is their choice, and the school is willing to accept the funding, can we agree, or can this bill address the fact that that student would get accepted into that school?
Well, you're welcome to make that offer of an amendment, but but I would personally not vote for it as a member of the committee, because that would be out of keeping with how we have rules and regs and how we have adopted other public funding going to private institutions, including Hope Scholarship. I don't think for a student, a Georgia student who uses the Hope Scholarship to attend Emory University, that we require Emory University to accept any student that wants to go there.
Well, I think that's apples and oranges. We're talking about
Yes.
kids trying to get a K through 12
Yes.
public education or private education with their parents' choice, and if they move from public because it's failing, or they have a choice and they're trying to get to a better school and are not allowed to be able to go to that school, then there still is some barriers. And I wanted to make sure that we pointed that out, and if you have a way to help those students and those parents really take advantage of the choice, I thought maybe that might be a friendly amendment.
And by the way, she's speaking with Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones, a Republican who is, of course, shilling for the SB 233, this school voucher bill. Man, Lydia Glaze really made a salient point. And this argument that, well, if a college student who's on Hope Scholarship lives blocks from Emory University, does that mean Emory University has to accept them? Yes, apples and oranges. Thank you, Lydia Glaze, for saying that. What a bullshit argument that is. I'm sorry. Attending a college or university versus attending a public or private, taking public funding money, when K through 12 education is something that from our frontier days, essentially, we have been looking to guarantee every child, regardless of income, regardless of whatever social stature you wish to. It's apples and oranges. Emory University, any college or university has has educational standards that they have to adhere to, and oh my gosh, you can't compare using the Hope Scholarship to colleges and universities to a K through 12 education. Oh my gosh. Can I just tell you, by the way, that for all the talk the Republicans have had about growing opportunity for kids to attend the school that best suits them or best aids them in their process of getting that quality K through 12 education, this friendly, by the way, had to be railed over by the Legislative Council on the amendment. How about that? The Legislative Council had to weigh in as to whether or not every child, once SB 233 becomes law, has access to this voucher program, would then get accepted by the private school nearest them if that's the school that they so chose to attend. And oh, by the way, that amendment failed. As did, by the way, another amendment that to me is just breathtaking. Doreen Carter wanted to seek an amendment that would insist that teachers in private schools be certified. I mean, the whole point of the private school voucher program is to ensure that students in failing schools can go to a private school that provides a better opportunity and education for them. You would think that the private schools would only hire teachers that are certified. That amendment as well failed. So SB 233 passed out of the House committee, will now be voted on the floor of the full House, and we all know Governor Brian Kemp awaiting a signature. He's ready to sign it. We'll be watching. It's going to do it for the Ron Show show notes. Again, at ronshowatl.com. Lots of legalese today. Replay 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio and back tomorrow 9 to 10 a.m. On demand at progressivevoices.com. Have a great day.